What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Sit Down Saturday, and today we're going to be talking about products that get rushed to market, but we're going to mainly focus on New Age versus Magic Square in regards to their Devastators and how that might be affecting what they're doing, because we're seeing the results. And I got a feeling that after these two Devastators are done, it'll probably warrant its own discussion again regarding these two and how it's been going and what impact the two have had on one another in regard to these Devastators. But there's a lot to unpack here. I have to first and foremost shout out Joel W., Patreon supporter, solid dude. He hit me up with this idea and then gave me a ton of facts and information and pictures, dates, just a ton of information. I'm very grateful for him because I probably wouldn't have done this had he not really brought it to my attention. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Now also, I know what you're thinking. You like what I've done with the place. Don't get used to it. I had to pack it all up to do a special project. It's all coming back. Don't get comfortable. But before we talk about this Devastator and rushing to market and all that kind of stuff, we do need to do a little bit of housekeeping. Last week with the Sit Down Saturday regarding the Victory Saber, a lot of people had a lot of interesting kind of ideas for stuff that Hasbro could tackle in a HasLab situation. I kept seeing the 13 primes like over and over and over again, and I don't think that's a bad idea, honestly. It wouldn't be for me, but I think that there's definitely a market for it. A lot of people upset with the kind of tactics used for this. Like, the thing about it, I think, ultimately, at the end of the day, is while it may be okay and fine, there's nothing about it that seems like an edge above what we get at the main line anyway. So why are we crowdfunding it? And if it's because the figure and character are too obscure, then Hasbro should make it its priority to make these more obscure characters more part of the mainstream by introducing them into media that people are consuming that hopefully is good. And there may be a discussion regarding around the less known G1 characters in the Western market and how that relates to the Western and Eastern companies in regard to making the characters and so on and so forth. This is a conversation that has come up a couple times in DMs recently. It's also come up on the Patreon Zoom meeting where I yelled for about an hour about why I think Eastern companies cater to Western markets more than we'd like to admit, and then felt bad for an hour. But it's just my passion. I scream at everybody and yell at everybody. I yelled at my kid one time for like an hour because she didn't appreciate the vocal range of Tina Marie and didn't appreciate what Sinead O'Connor was able to do with Prince writing. And the quiet words of some nice lady you probably have disappointed. It's not you, it's me. But I think it might be a discussion worth tapping into and giving a little bit of time to. Then we had that Megatron, and look, it's good, and yet it's weird. But the weirdness about it has nothing to do with 3-0. It has everything to do with the original kind of design. And I think that's just where I gotta keep it. And then there's this Scrapper and Mixmaster. And look, I think that ultimately we're gonna tie a lot of that into the conversation today, which is why I saved this one for last to kind of segue. But that chest seems to be falling off for everybody. It has something to do with the pin, the way that the pins, it's not right. It was probably rushed to market. So we've seen this kind of tactic used plenty of times where companies try to get something out super quick in order to either edge out competition, try to, in my opinion, sometimes scrape in the last couple bucks before Chinese New Year. There's a lot of reasons why it happens. But I think the one that we're going to focus on today is mainly this Devastator situation because it circles around competition. And while I agree with most of you that competition is a great thing in regard to third party, it's not great when it comes to two things. It's not great when they're constantly cannibalizing each other and cannibalizing the market space where they have to ultimately earn their mortgage from or whatever the case may be. It's also not great when they do it at the expense of the quality of the product for the customer. And I think that's what we're seeing here largely with what's going on with these two Constructicon sets. So if you'll allow me to break down for you the kind of course of events, the chain of events and the dates and times in which they took place, so hopefully it'll make both of us, but mainly you, but both of us, aware of how this might impact the quality of the product that we're ultimately receiving. Let's begin. Let's start with one example from Magic Square. January 29th, 2019, Magic Square's silhouette reveal for their Devastator hits the boards. But not too long after that, they pretty much go completely silent regarding it. Now, they did a very similar maneuver with their Stunticons, so it's not necessarily outside of the realm of normalcy regarding their rollout, but it goes to show that they had this in store for quite some time. 2 years and some change later, in 2021, we finally get to see a full combine mode, as well as a Mixmaster prototype to give you an idea of what the individual bots will look like. And then shortly thereafter come a few more reveals along with information regarding their plan for release, which is going to include 3 2-packs, not to be confused
with this gentleman, or 1 6-pack, or one of these 6-packs. But no, 3 2-packs was their plan for distribution. 3 months later, they finally showed off the full team with the combined mode. Now, in the midst of this time, New Age starts rolling theirs out. So from January 29th, 2019 to June 6th, 2021, they've got all the time in the world, or so it seems. But in the midst of that, New Age shows their plans. And now, all of a sudden, the heat gets turned up on that pot. And within the release schedule for New Age comes Scrapper and Mixmaster, released 2 months ago overseas. But we haven't seen them stateside, possibly because of what's going on at the California ports. It also seems like there's exclusive distribution with the Chosen Prime for North America because there are no listings for any of their competitors. To include BBTS, which may not actually be relevant since they basically silently purged just about everything from Magic Square since around the time The Light of Freedom was released, which I can only guess had to do with outside pressure as well. Now, in the midst of this, there have been a few complaints regarding QC, mainly due to missing pins. It may not be widespread, but there's at least evidence of something. Now, some of you might think, but that's not necessarily a rush to market. They've been planning it since 2019. And on the surface, I would say I agree. However, New Age reveals their prototype of Scavenger on March 4th, shortly after, like 1 to 2 hours after Magic Square showed theirs. Then in May, 2 months later, we get Scavenger and Bone Crusher. And then within basically 2 weeks, on June 6th, which also paralleled with Magic Square's reveal, we see the rest of the crew with the same approach of 3 2-packs. Then 3 months later, a total of 6 months from the first reveal, all 6 figures, plus probably the largest parts forming piece ever made, are released. That is, of course, overseas, but the ETA for the States is October for the final sets. Speaking of the sets, Set A released with no problems. Set B, as we just saw a couple days ago, are experiencing a ton of problems. Some of the complaints have circled around Scrapper's legs, which New Age says they're going to make replacements for. But the most obvious issue is the chest piece, which if you look through the comments of Wednesday's video, you'll see that I'm far from the only one who has experienced such issues. And this is the most obvious and blatant, most recent example of the problems that surround rushing to market when competition is so bloodthirsty.
So I think if you turn a blind eye to all of that and think that none of the elements of competition impact these two companies in regard to what they're doing and how they're doing it, then you may be just burying your head in the sand because it seems pretty obvious when you start to look at it. Obviously, all this stuff was in the works for a long time. Either one of them are copying off each other in that regard. It's Devastator. It's one of the most popular Transformers ever created. It's always going to bring in the money. It's gonna happen. They were both probably planning on it. Everything from season 1 and 2 in the movie have probably been planned by both companies. The problem with all this stuff is when you get beyond the movie. That's when people start trailing off. So these Devastators have been in the works forever. They've just been playing this cat and mouse game in regards to one another as to when to release it. And New Age waited. They waited patiently at first. You see that light just turn on when I did that? But they waited because they knew at a silhouette they didn't have to reveal anything. They could let Magic Square kind of work it out. But as soon as Magic Square seemed ready with product, New Age is on them, and on them fast. And went from 0 to 60, and perhaps at the extent of us. Now, they're supposed to be offering all sorts of solutions, and that's great. Solutions are better than no solution. But a couple things that we need to be looking for there, and that is the speed and efficiency of the product. And then simultaneously be looking at what's going on with the distribution of Magic Square, because something's amiss there too. Store exclusivity is something that we've seen in third party since Warbitron days, when BBTS had a 90-day exclusivity in regards to Warbitron's Bruticus. We've seen companies teeter around it for the last couple years, but it seems like Magic Square might be one of them. I, for one, am strongly against that. Anytime that any one of these distributors gets complete exclusivity over a product, it never works out good for us. But perhaps that's a topic for another day. Let's talk a little bit more about products that may have been rushed to market. And some of these, to be fair, maybe all of these, I'm going out on a limb. And Joel's going out, and we're both going out on a limb together. Some of them were his suggestions, and then some of them were mine. And if it even wasn't the case, I think there's still evidence to suggest that perhaps it was by accident. Meaning, it's not that they were rushing to market in order to kill competition. Competition is not a part of any of these guys' with the exception maybe of one, agenda. So why would they rush to market? Well, that's another question. Some of these companies are leasing space in factories. They may have only have like a number of months left on a specific spot in order to get, there's so many different reasons why it might be possible. But at the very least, even if they aren't rushed, they feel rushed for one reason or another. And it's not to bash these companies, and we'll even show in some respects how they've gone out of their way to try to fix it. Honestly, in most respects. But it does perhaps show a little bit of haste on their part and what that haste ultimately means for us. So let's go ahead and get into a few of those examples.
Look at Transform Elements Mirage. Initially released with misassembled hips, later versions were fixed, but some of those ended up with green ankle flaps, so it had a different set of issues. Look at MMC's Star Convoy. The spring locks were warping because of the open space at the inside of the leg, to which they responded and plan on supplying replacement locks and all sorts of bells and whistles to fix it, but perhaps it's just another issue. And I don't know if I can confirm that this X-Transbots lock had a rush to release. It doesn't seem like that would be the case since it came out far after its competitors of Toy World and Fans Toys, but something about it certainly seems in haste. There's claims of a subcontracted factory, which I'm not 100% sure that I believe, but later on, Springer's release is delayed, supposedly it being involved with the subcontracted factory, so perhaps there is some truth to it. Fans Hobby also hasn't escaped unscathed from this. Their Armada Prime, released in early February, quickly had reports from customers about cracks in the chest, and subsequently, super mode fingers breaking. They publicly responded that what happened was the pin used was machined with too large a diameter, and even taking Chinese New Year into account, they were still able to announce before the end of the month plans to issue replacement parts. And then most recently, their Go Shooter, which was scheduled to release at the end of July, the day before he was scheduled to ship from the factory to warehouse, they discovered that the protective film that they laid across the hood, which we often see used specifically in SH Figuarts and other import figures to protect the paint, was actually damaging the paint as opposed to protecting it. Ironic. They decided to halt shipping so that they can remake those parts. And I think lastly, the one last elephant in the room that we have to think about is how quickly Fans Toys started releasing combiner pieces with, in my opinion, out not knowing whether or not their combiners were actually going to work. But because the Stunticons specifically were in competition with two other companies simultaneously, I think there was a strong move to get those puppies out the door. And as we've seen with that, a strong halt ever since Dragstrip and a strong halt for the last two of their aerial bots.
So look, at the end of the day, when the rubber meets the road, it's 7 p.m. after dinner and we started cleaning up. What does this all mean? It all means that every time that we complain about things taking so long, that perhaps we should stop and say, but if we wait a little bit longer and it comes out right, perhaps it's worth the wait. Perhaps it should more so be a lesson for each one of us to maybe take a more humbling stance in regards to what we're exactly entitled to and when we're entitled to it. Maybe take a second, take a breath, and say, you know what? If it's another 6 months, it's another 6 months. I'd rather it be right. I'd rather the chest stay on. I know that's how I feel. Look how long I've been waiting for Fans Toys Trailbreaker. What'll feel like forever is a mighty long time. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.